we put the first slide on. So we are now officially recording. So I'd just like to warmly welcome Tom. Today's session is entitled Workflows, Creating a Happy Path to an Alma Mindset. Tom, who's the Digital Library Innovation and Development Manager from University of New South Wales, is going to provide this presentation for us. I think Tom said it's probably going to be maybe 25-30 minutes, and then we'll have questions after that. Okay, so I'd just like to hand over to Tom.
Okay, thank you, Jason. You can see from this first slide that this was a presentation given by Sue Harmer and Carmel Carlson, which we gave at Igloo in Berlin a couple of months ago. So it's got a fairly wide audience. Have adjusted just slightly, but you'll discover that the first slide is a description of what University of New South Wales is, which I'm sure you're all aware of. A fairly large university. We have 3 campuses. We're across 2 cities. We have 7,500 staff and 52,000 students, and about a third of them are from overseas. So the other part is that we had shifted to Primo 3 years ago, so the Alma implementation isn't getting a double whammy with Primo implementation. Last year we had 5.5 million searches through Primo. This year we're expecting 6.5 million. Keeps going up. For Alma, we're a fairly standard site. Our kickoff was back in March. Our go live is Monday week, which is why I'm presenting and not Sue and Carmel, who are hopefully getting our final configuration done by 4 p.m. today, because that's the last time we can do it. We had our Alma production service provided to us on the 8th of May. We had our standard first functional workshop in June. We got our Primo over our Alma in July. We then had our second functional workshop, and we're in the midst of data extraction and signing off everything at the moment, or go live in Monday week, which is either good or extremely scary, one of the two. One of the challenges we faced with moving to Alma is that what we wanted to do, and what we had heard from many other sites who had gone live, was that it was an opportunity to unify and simplify a whole series of policies. The other part we needed to do was to stop thinking how Aleph, Voyager and SFX worked, and the way we worked with them to get them work the way we wanted, and to think about new workflows. At UNSW we have both Aleph and Voyager, which we're both migrating to Alma. We also had to work out how to test the data migration from the 2 or the 3 systems, and how to design new workflows for Alma. We also had to work out how to document our issues so that Exodus understood them, and also we needed to decide things like what we wanted to have done before we went live or on go live, and what we could afford to wait until after, and the things that really didn't matter at all and we didn't really care about. The Alma implementation team at UNSW is very much focused on the business units. So the business units work and do their job all day, but the things we needed them to think about weren't normally the things that they think about when they come to work. So they needed to determine what their core business functions were. So although they would know that back to front, sitting down and writing down what your core business function is sometimes hard to do when you're doing it every day. We also needed to work out, for them to work out what was important and what was less important. And again, everything seems important when you're doing it. We also needed them to write test plans and define test data that would actually give us good test results and be confident that the way we wanted things to work was going to work. And again, we hadn't done these for quite a few years. We did do them when we did Primo, but we hadn't done them. But the skills we had on the implementation team were variable. So what we decided to do was to run 2 half-day workshops just for library staff. The first one, which I'll describe in this presentation, was on how to model business processes using workflow diagrams, and we used a specific type of workflow diagram called a swim lane diagram. The second half-day workshop was for library staff on how to write a good regression test plan. So where they fitted was between the kickoff and the delivery of Alma production on the 8th of May. So we ran a series of modelling workshops, and I think we actually ran 2 regression testing workshops as well. They were both only half days so that people weren't far away from their workplace. Just describe the actual modelling business processes course we did. And I'll come to why we end up calling it the Happy Path to Alma course later. So the outcomes we wanted from the course was for our library staff, but particularly the people on the implementation team, to be able to identify the components of their business processes, to be able to break them down into a set of steps, and then to understand why they were doing this and how to structure them in a way that made sense, and then be able to write all that down and represent it in a model using a workflow diagram. So we developed this course in-house. Steve Pappas from our project support unit wrote the course and delivered it, which was good. And it was only a half day and it was quite successful. So what we taught in the course was that when you're writing down what your business processes are, you need to focus just on the core business function and what is important, not all the bits and pieces that hang around it and all the exceptions and all the weird things that can happen, to focus completely on what is a core business function for each of the work units that we're moving to from Aleph and Voyager and SFX to Alma. We also taught them that they need to make sure that the process they're writing down is not related to any system, that is particularly not the way we were doing things in Aleph and Voyager and SFX, to try and make the system part a system rather than a particular system. The way we taught them in these courses was to first write down what is the normal course of activity, which is also in workflow, this process modeling design is called the basic workflow or the main workflow, but it's also called the happy path. And this is where we started talking about the happy path, and that became a reasonable catchphrase. People understood what we were talking about. So what I'll show you is, oh no, there's another set here. Comes to giving other people's presentations. The other part that we wanted to emphasize was that they just needed to start. Modeling is an iterative process, so you write down what your first best guess is. You then can review your model and you can ask other people to review it as well. The other part to do when you're doing the modeling is to ensure each of the activities is accurate, so that you've got all the steps defined and that you've got the workflow designed. And the way we did the workflows was to use what's called swim lane diagrams, which I'll show you now. So the swim lane diagrams, this is the way we did them in the course. So you get sticky notes and you write down each of the activities. You can see the dotted line going across the screen. So that above that is one swim lane, in the middle of the screen is the second swim lane, and in the bottom is the third swim lane. So each of the activities got written down on a piece of paper and stuck up on a wall, and then people in a group could work out what the workflow would be. This is the outcome. I remember this one in the course, and to start with it did not look like this at all. It was quite messy, but at the end it looked like this. What we then got them to do, or what we have, is a tool to make it look very neat and calm. Here you can see this is loaning an item. So there's 3 swim lanes. The top part of the diagram is for the library client, the user, the student, the staff member who wants to borrow a book. The middle part is what the system does, and it might be Aleph, it could be Voyager, it could be the self-check machine, it could be Alma, it could be Primo, but a system does that middle lane. And the bottom part is the library staff, in this case our client service unit staff, and the tasks that they might do. So the green line, which runs through the middle of the diagram, is the happy path. This is what we expect to happen, and this is what we would like to happen. So if I just go through the happy path, We start at the top left. The client wants to borrow an item. So what they do in our case is take it to a self-check machine. So the system does one check. It checks if the client has blocks. The happy path would be that they have no blocks. So that goes across to the system recording that they have a loan, and then it updates the client's record in the system, and then go up on the happy path. The client would receive a confirmation, and that's the end of the process. That's what most loaning of an item is, and that's the happy path we'd like to achieve. The reason we want that happy path is this is the key thing that must work in Alma or any system. So this is the one that we had to write the proper regression test plans to get the proper data to make sure it worked 100% of the time. But you can see there's some variations here. So if we go starting, if the client borrows an item and does the client have blocks, the answer may be yes. So the client, if we go up following the diagram, the client receives a rejection, and the client then has a choice. They can either appeal the block or not appeal the block. So if they don't want to appeal the block, and that's the end of that process. If they do, at UNSW, they would approach the client service unit staff in the help zone at on the level 2 of the main library or in any of the libraries. So the client services staff then check the client's records, and they then have a choice. The library staff has a choice to either override the block and loan the item, and then the system records the item, and the system updates the client record, and the client receives confirmation at the end of the process. So we're back on the happy path. If the staff decide not to, then the client receives a rejection notice, is told about the rejection, and then in theory they can appeal the block. If they don't want to, that's the end of the process. And this covers all of our borrowing activities in a workflow diagram at a reasonably high level. But we now know exactly what we need the system to do. We know what the client is expecting. We know what interaction the library staff are expected to have. One of the odd things about this diagram when it was written down is that there's an endless loop in here that the client can keep appealing the block. So they can appeal the block, which the staff who override the block can decide not to, then they can appeal. That can happen, but we decided that this is a workflow business process diagram, and that particular activity where the user wants to keep appealing the block wouldn't be part of this, and in fact it's not handled by a system. So we didn't need to record it, and we didn't need to test it. So here you can see, going back over it, the happy path is that green line, and that's what we wanted to make sure that everyone was able to write down by doing the core activity and the key parts that fit into that workflow that we would need to get Alma to do. The happy path itself, we actually, in the course, did 2 group exercises. One, first one was done as an entire group, and we picked something that everyone knows that they do, which is applying for recreation leave. So as a group, we broke them up into groups, and they each wrote down what they do and created a swim lane diagram. In the second part, we broke them down into work unit groups. The client services work unit for borrowing items sat down as a group, and they chose a business process in their unit and created the swim lane diagram. So this particular diagram here is what they came up with in the class. And they had to then present it to class, back to the class. So what they did when they left the course was they'd actually written down one entire work process and had it validated amongst the whole group. So it was actually quite a nice outcome. So what we were hearing before we did Happy Path training, which was only this half-day workshop, we were hearing that they didn't know where to start in writing down their business workflows. They didn't know where to start when checking what Alma was going to do. They weren't too sure what they were supposed to be looking at. They couldn't work out, they were looking in Alma, what the next step would be. We had the sandbox already, but we couldn't question was, well, what do I do next in Alma? By writing down the happy path, we had a workflow that we needed to test. So you could start off, library client wants to borrow a book. So the first thing is, how do we get them to interact with the system? Other things that we were hearing were things like, Alma won't do what I want. And in fact, Alma doesn't do it that way, it may do a different way. And this is what I do in Aleph, how do I do it in Alma? So by moving away from talking about it the way a system worked, by being able to write down a workflow diagram, when we were looking at how Alma works, we could go, the client wants to borrow an item. The first thing we need to test in the system is, does the client have any blocks? How does the client go about borrowing an item? How does it record it? How is the client record updated, or is it updated correctly? And how does the client receive information? So if I just go through this just to show that the system is generic, we use mostly self-check machines. So when we, on the right-hand side, the client receives a confirmation. It's actually not Alma sending the client the confirmation. Alma sends it to the self-check machine. The self-check machine shows it on the screen, the confirmation that the item's been borrowed, and it's a self-check machine that talks to the printer attached to it, prints a piece of paper that tells them how long the loan is for. So this system line isn't necessarily just Alma. It's certainly not Aleph, and it's not Voyager, and it's not SFX. So the advantage of using this approach is that we could focus people on the process, or people could get focused on what process they needed to test, and to write straightforward test plans, and to walk their way through the Alma system to see how things work according to the workflows that we needed to sustain. So after the Happy Path training, it was called, when people were leaving, they were calling it the Happy Path training, so it became a catchphrase. One of the nice things about this was, before we did the training, Alma was some unknown thing that was coming. This was way back in March and April, and it's now November almost. So it seemed a long way away, and it was complex or different, and it doesn't look the same. But all of a sudden, Alma and Happy got associated in the same group. And what happened when people left the course was they were able to go back to their work units, and they were able to write down their core workflows immediately. So they could write down workflows for ordering electronic material, or activating them, or ordering print material, or processing intercampus loans. Any of those they could break down into straightforward steps. But the Happy Path is the one that we expect to work most of the time, which is the one that we need to work absolutely completely in Alma, and the exceptions to that Happy Path, where Alma might be able to support them, or there may be manual things we need to do, like the appeals process for somebody disputing a fine doesn't meet what we want in Alma, so we're able to say, well, it doesn't exist in Aleph or Voyager, so we'll continue with our manual process until Alma has functionality that we need. The other useful thing about writing down the Happy Path training, the Happy Path course, was that we were able to see where things different for what were good reasons, but we could actually look at each of the areas where we had variations. One of them was in borrowing privileges, so not necessarily for our staff and students, but for a lot of the associated members for the library, so for the NIDA staff, the NIDA students, the ULA students, the community borrowers that we had, they all had different periods, they all had different rights, they all had different fines, they all had different things they can borrow. So what we've ended up doing is simplifying that down to a very, just to two categories, one for associates and one for community borrowers. So it's actually been quite useful in terms of this is what we want to achieve. The other part that was a good outcome from this is that when we were getting exhibitors to do the configuration of Alma for us, we were fairly confident that the decisions we were making were based on how we wanted it to work, so that we could know that this is the workflow we needed to support. This was the core workflow, the Happy Path workflow. So this is what the configuration should look like. These were the variations that we needed to put into the system, and these were the ones we needed. Anything else we didn't need. So when we were telling Equilibris what configuration we needed, we were also reasonably confident that we were telling them the right thing, or we weren't going to change our mind. That didn't work all the time. There were a few revisits over the period, but I think that happens with any project. The things that it did was that it actually made for very good test plans. So people could say, for the happy path for borrowing an item, these are the things I need to test, and these are the variations I need to test. These are the types of records I need to find. These are the types of users I need to find. These are the variations in loan policies. These are the types of user groups. This is how they're going to interact, and this is the information the user wants back. This is what the library staff is going to need to be able to look up in a user's record to work out whether to override a block or not override a block. But by writing down that workflow diagram, it actually made the writing of the test plans relatively straightforward. It also meant that when we had issues or questions that we needed to ask Equilibris, we already knew what the expected outcome was. One of the things we try to do with Equilibris is tell them this is what's happening, and give them the scenario of these are the steps we went through. But the more important thing is this is what we expect to happen. And by having the path workflow, we could say we would expect this to happen, and this is not what's happening, or this is what's happening differently to what we're expecting. So made being able to write down well-documented issues to send to Equilibris a bit more straightforward. The other part that it had, because I think I don't know how many tickets we've had in about Alma, but it's approaching 300 or 400 changes since March that we've put in. Partly questions to ourselves, partly questions to Equilibris. But it also meant that we were able to then more easily rank them. So the happy path one, that green path, things that must work. So here I go. This one. So everything on that green path must work on day one, on the 4th of November, Monday week, which is that far away. The checking of the block, the recording of the loan, the updating of the client record, the client receives confirmation, all of that must work. So that meant that the ZIP2 interaction with the self-check machines all had to work, as well as that the various client groups got the right borrowing period. The appealing a block, that had to work out whether it was a block and send a rejection. But the appealing of the block doesn't necessarily need to be done through Alma, because what they're doing is approaching the CSU staff in our workflow, and CSU staff, or the library staff, need to be able to check the client record and override the block. We didn't necessarily need a system that has an online appeal mechanism. So Alma's online appeal mechanism doesn't quite meet what we need, so we're able to say that the green line is absolutely high and must be there for go live. It would be very nice if there was an online appeal system. We don't care, either of those. So if we go back to here, the high is the happy path, which must be fixed or must work before we go live. Medium would be we'd really like it before we go live, but if it isn't there before we go live, then we'll try and get it done as quickly as possible afterwards. And low issues in our classification meant we could go live without them. That enabled us as the implementation team to focus on the high issues and talk to Equilibris about getting all those fixed. Medium to say, well, if this comes, that would be excellent, and we will make sure we've tested it properly. But if they're low, then really we don't mind either way. So the appealing of a block online is not something that's high or medium. I think it ends up being low. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'll probably get into trouble for saying that later, but we don't have that functionality in Alpha or Voyager now, and we could go live without it. So we didn't really mind. The green path was the one we needed to concentrate on. But here, also happened was that when somebody was raising an issue in one of our meetings or discussing things or putting out an email saying this appears to be happening, what we could do is point them back to writing down what the workflow would be for that particular scenario or where it fits into an existing scenario. Because sometimes the issue is quite vague, but once you've written it down in terms of a workflow, you can see what are the key things that you need to do and what are the key things we need to make sure works, and also whether it fits into an existing workflow and it was something we'd already agreed or is obvious from the workflow that is not a happy path is still essential. So it made us focus on, rather than saying this is not working, by being able to document what we wanted to happen and then being able to say this is not working at this particular point, or it's working slightly differently, but that's okay. It actually had quite a nice change. The other part that we've discovered is it was such a popular course for the Alma implementation team that our document supply service, we currently use Aleph ILL and Relay as a separate system for UNSW Canberra. It doesn't talk to Voyager. So removing Alma, when we examined it, didn't have I don't think it has an ILL component within Alma. So we've decided to go completely with Relay. What we were able to do was run this same course just for the document supply service, provide down all the workflows so that when we're assessing what document supply system we would like to purchase, and we were very clear on what are the functions absolutely had to be in there and what are the functions that would be nice to be there and what are the functions that if they're there that's fine, but if they're not we don't really mind. So on that basis we're able to choose Relay, and on that basis we're also able to get the INSIP interoperability working between Relay and Alma to a point where we're confident that the interoperability will work. However, we've run out of time to actually implement it by Monday week, and that will be done in the first month after we go live. The other unit in the library, the academic services unit in the library, who aren't directly involved with Alma, also asked for the Happy Path training, as it got called, because what they were doing was reviewing all of their procedure manuals. So as the basis of procedure manuals, if you can write down the workflow, you can then exactly work out what the procedure manual should say, because you've got what is the happy path, the core parts, and then you've got the variations. It makes it a lot easier to write down a procedure manual. That's basically it. So if I just go back to here, you can see these courses were run way back at the beginning of the year, but they've actually stood us in good stead throughout the whole of our implementation. So we can keep going back to them, our workflow diagrams and those swim lane diagrams, to really focus on exactly what we need to get done before we go live Monday week. So this diagram here hasn't really changed, that entire process. The green path is still the happy path, and they're the variations that we can see. That's basically it. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Tom. So if anyone's got a question, please click the little hand button and then I'll enable your microphone for you. I see one question, I think, from Tony, so I'll see if I can enable your microphone. I'm not having any luck enabling your microphone, Tony. I'm just picking up a couple of questions here. So I'll just start with a couple of the text interface questions that are coming through. So, Tom, we've got one from John Brown from Curtin saying, what software did you use to document your workflows?
I've actually forgotten. I think it was Visio, but I can find out. I can't remember what we were using.
Probably was Visio, I'd say. The other option is, I think there's another one called SmartDraw.
Yeah, no, I just don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay, I've got a question from Tanya saying, is this presentation being recorded? Yes, it is. Right, doesn't look like we've got any other questions at the moment from anyone. I'll just give you 30 seconds or so, but Here's one from Alan. Have you had any instances where the happy path or some subsidiary path had to change based on the way Alma works?
I don't know of any. There probably were, but the idea of writing down workflows, particularly in that swim lane tool, is that the middle swim lane of the system is meant to be is not meant to be related to any system. So as I was saying, for the borrowing an item, that system bit in the middle was in fact both Primo, Alma, PDS, the self-check machine, Active Directory, all of that's sitting in that system center. So there are some things that we wanted to do which we won't be able to do, and there are some things we didn't care whether they did them one way or not. But in essence, you shouldn't be writing it down in a way that is related to a system. But I'm sure, because we've been using Aleph and Voyager for many years, the way we were thinking the workflow works is the way that system works, and it's not necessarily the way Alma works. But I'm not 100% sure whether we actually changed any.
Right. I'm just checking to see if we have any other questions. What system do you use to document issues?
We're using, and we do use, the University Central IT Service Desk tool, which is CASD, Computer Associates Service Desk tool. I think that's what CASD does. So we get people to put in tickets plus the scenario, the issue, what they expect to occur, any screen attachments. So they're all recorded in one place, and we can track them there. So we weren't using a separate system to record issues. We're just using the one tool that we've been using for quite a few years to do with any issue, to do with any of the library applications. It also means that the answers to those that we were able to put in, or the changes we got to the configuration or Alma, or the changes we needed to do in Primo, were all recorded in that system. So 2 years later, when we go to look at why we did things, or we have this problem before, it's actually still sitting in the same tool that we're going to be using to solve problems. There are other software that you can use that tracks systems easier, but then it's hard to look in two places in the future as to why or how an issue got resolved at the time.
Thanks, Tom. We've got two more questions here. Would you be prepared to share your documented workflows?
Yeah, I'm sure you will. Yes, just email me. Actually, I didn't put my email in this presentation. I took out Susan Carmel, so I didn't email them. But just email me if you want the slides from the course or the speaking notes I think we have for the course. But also, if you've got any particular workflows that you want to look at, I can see whether we've got an equivalent workflow for UNSW library.
Thanks, Tom. And one more question too from Alan. Did you go back to the workflows to continue making them more sophisticated, or did you just leave them in their initial form?
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure they probably got left in their initial form. There's so much work to do with Alma, and so much getting to understand the way the system works and exactly what it's doing and how our data looks in one system and how it looks in another, and then changing the way we do our policies and trying to work out that work. I don't remember anyone making their workflows more and more detailed. However, I think the ones that were done for the Academic Services Unit for their work procedures, they may have started off at providing procedure manuals, may have started off at a fairly high level. They may have then done lower level ones so that they could actually document the procedures at a much lower level. But I don't think you need to go down to too lower level. I think the lower you go, the more likely you are to be associating the workflow with the way a particular system works.
couple more questions. Can you also share your test plans?
Yeah, I think we could. I'm not sure what state they're in. But don't ask me in the next week and a half, because we're using them heavily at the moment to test that everything's working for the 4th of November.
Just one more question from Alan. Do you wish you'd had some kind of training like this long ago? It seems like it helps people articulate their issues.
Yeah, and it's certainly something, well, at UNSW Library we have a unit called the Project Support Unit, which is just normal library staff. What the unit is used for is that when a work area comes up with a change they want to do, they can ask for assistance from the Project Support Unit. So the Project Support Unit at that point, and so it might be reviewing our mobile phone interface, it may be putting in a new room booking system, it may be looking at a workflow, it doesn't necessarily need to be related to a system, but the Project Support Unit role is to assist the work unit to define what they want to do, work out the outcomes, work out what the steps are, what all the various bits and pieces are, and part of that is to skill them, the work unit, up into being able to write down things like workflows. So we had been doing it as part of that work. We didn't have a formal half-day workshop, but it was one of the things that had been useful about having that unit is it was very quick for that unit to write what you would normally expect a business process workflow look like, because that's what they've been doing with the work units for the last couple of years. But it certainly has helped, and it's only looking at documents plan, looking at academic services unit, it's now seen as a useful tool to be able to write down what you want to do or what you currently do in the workflow you want to support.
Thanks, Tom. There's another question. Are you using Alma for eReserve?
I'm not sure what eReserve, I'm not sure what the question is, what eReserve is.
There's no other questions at the moment. I'm not sure if anyone wants to elaborate on that question.
I'm happy to be emailed later if you've got want to elaborate then. Oh, okay.
Oh, eReserve is, yeah, digitalized book chapters. Okay.
Not yet. So we're keeping digital for UNSW Library in Sydney and Quella in Canberra. We want to look at Alma a bit more carefully for digitization workflows. When we looked at it and we had the workflows that we needed to support, it doesn't quite do what we want to do, but we add, for that purpose in Sydney and Canberra, we're keeping the existing software. The advantage of Primo is that we just pipe those straight, we can pipe those straight into Primo and they become searchable, so that the user is oblivious that we're using different systems underneath. It's only our plan to look at both the ability of Alma to store digital content and the workflows that are used to support it.
Thanks, Tom. We've got time for one more question, I'd say. So does anyone else have a question? How happy are you with Alma in general? that's quite a low one.
Yes, that's a lot. Well, we're not live till 4th of November, and I think with any system implementation, they're big because they affect all library staff. This one isn't necessarily affecting the users. Hopefully, don't see much change because we've had the Premier interface for quite a few years. But, yeah, don't know. Depends which day of the week you ask me. And Tuesdays is a bad day, apparently, because every Tuesday I think we're not doing enough, or it's not going to work properly. But today is not Tuesday, so it seems quite good. We have been very vigilant in making sure that we're getting everything we need. And that has been a lot of work. But it's only part of that has been being able to write down these workflows and being able to really focus on exactly what we need to go live. So we'll cross our fingers. But you know, Swinburne, RMIT, UWS, and Monash have gone before us in Australia, so we're very happy with the amount of effort they put into getting Alma to the point it is, and we hope we've contributed something back to Alma so that the people after us can also build on it, because it is still a product that's under development, and it is developing quite rapidly. Yes, we're number 5 in Australia, so that's quite nice.
Great. Well, thank you, Tom. So that's it for today, everyone. If you on the interface, you should be able to see there's an applaud button. So if you can find that, you can click that to give some virtual applause. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And so yeah, big thanks to Tom. So that's the second of our ANZREG webinars. We will be looking at doing a third one, probably November sometime. So obviously the committee will send out another email, and you can contact me with your registering your interest. So thank you very much, everyone. The recording will be available definitely within the next week or so. We'll pop that up on the ANZREG site for you. Have a good day.